So starting over now that my internet's more stable, thank you for joining us on the Spring 2021 Book Buzz. Hopefully next spring it'll be in person and you guys can drink wine like you usually do. I can't wait for that. Obviously we have Cindy here. She's gonna take you on a wonderful journey through the cream of the crop of publishing in this spring and summer. And if you didn't receive you should have all received the list she created, but today you get to roll out. You guys are the first ones, besides library staff, who get to see the notable 20. So congratulations, have fun, and I'm going to turn over to
Notable 20.
Yes,
Thank
you were all
you.
brave to sign
Can't
up for this one instead of the one tomorrow evening. Well, I have actually will have practiced a couple of times and be much
No,
better
it's
at
better
it.
this
But
way.
it's wonderful to see you all. I don't think we've ever done this program this early in the day. And it's kind of fun over Zoom. You know, most of the Zoom programs are in the evening. So everyone's, I mean, it's gloomy and gray out, but you're all in daylight, which is really kind of nice. Everyone's homes look much brighter than usual. So that's a treat for me. I already got a tisk from reminding you that wine and beer and anything else you feel like drinking is allowed during this program, but it is even at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I have, for those of you who've attended in the Wallingford Victorian Inn, I have a rule that I don't drink during the first session. I drink 1 glass of wine in that hour-long break in between the first and the second session. I sip a second glass of wine during the second session, and then I finish the bottle after everything is done. So I'm not drinking during this session. I will be drinking at 5, and I'm not saying what I'm doing after the 5 o'clock session is over. But you should definitely feel free. I do have a nice glass of water, so I will be sipping that. It's not vodka, it's water, I promise. I thought about it, but it's actually water. Okay, so as Leah said, hopefully you all got with the Zoom link, the PDF attachments of the handouts. If you print them on the fancy Book Buzz paper that we have in the library, they look like this. They're 8.5 by 14. Don't print them on 8.5 by 11 paper. Somebody did that last fall and missed all the books at the bottom. They cut off. So just as a reminder for the returners and to just refresh the new people, there's 8 handouts in total. Literary fiction, popular fiction, which is the Pattersons and the Baldaccis and the Daniel Steeles, the ones that are guaranteed to be at the top of the New York Times list, no matter what they're about. Mysteries and thrillers, other fiction, which is a catch-all, and as always is the hardest category to fit into just one handout. This is historical fiction. It's the summer beach reads. It's chick lit. It's dystopic fiction. It's fantasy. It's anything that isn't in the sort of narrow erudite literary fiction category. Short stories and essays. This is the shortest handout. It has 40 books. All of the others have 59. Biography and memoir, history and politics. And just for those of you who are faithful followers of this program, we are coming to the end of the heavy duty politics that used to be inundating this handout. We don't have that many books about the former president, and we have a lot more really interesting history books in here. And then other nonfiction, which is always a super interesting catch-all. So those are the handouts. They're easy to pull up on your computer or your tablet and look at. If you want printouts of them, and I know Pat Dokis has already asked for them, we would be happy to give you physical copies. When we're together at the inn, there are stacks of these waiting for you to take. But since we're doing it this way, we're sending them electronically too. Just contact me or Leah or call the library and let us know if you want the physical printouts of any or all of those genres, and we'll send them to you. Okay, so what's going to happen is that in a minute, I'm going to share my screen and show you a slideshow of 20 books, the so-called 20 notables that I think are worth your specific attention. And all 20 are in one of these 8 handouts. But they're the books that I think are either showing up the most on the most anticipated books of 2021 lists, or have otherwise are hitting a hot button topic, or are by an author who has proven to be a home run hitter when it comes to books. And so I picked 20 topics to discuss with you. I urge you, I plead with you, interrupt me, ask me questions. I think a lot of you are on mute. You don't have to stay on mute if you don't want to. I do not want to lecture at you for 60 minutes. I really want to talk with you for 60 minutes. So interrupt me. You can do that by Pat Dorenzo's really good at this, just starting to talk. That's a really good way to interrupt me. Or if you don't, if you want to be a little more polite about it, put something in the chat, put a question in the chat or a comment in the chat, and Leah will read it out. I won't be able to see most of you when I'm sharing my screen, so just don't be shy. At the end, we'll come back together and we'll talk about, just sort of recap and see if there's any specific thoughts you have on any of the 20 books that I'm going to talk about. Does that sound good? Questions? This is friends. Imagine us sitting in the big double parlor at the Wallingford Victorian Inn, in the circle where we're all looking at each other and sharing thoughts. And let's do that here. Okay? Much better, especially if we're not drinking this early in the day. You got to do something. Okay. So let's see. Hopefully everyone can see this.
Yep.
I even put a title on this for the first time on my slideshow. So Leah and Jane, who I know is also on, know that I have varying degrees of agony as I pick these 20 books. And the first book that I picked for Book Buzz was actually one of the very easiest to pick. It's called Clara and the Sun. It's by KAZUO ISHIGURO, and it's coming out tomorrow. Just in case everyone isn't, we're talking about books coming out between today and August 31st. That's our publishing window. Publication dates in the US, unless you are James Patterson, are on Tuesdays. James Patterson's books come out on Mondays, just because he's James Patterson. And so I'm going to be talking about a variety of Tuesdays between now and the end of August. Also, I think some of you know that the publication dates have been completely whack since the pandemic hit. Things are starting to settle down. Things are more consistent, but I think a lot of what is coming out over the next several months is just sort of catching up from the backlog that hit when the pandemic started. And from what I know of what's slated to come out in the fall, I think we'll be caught up and back in business, and things will be back to normal by then. Okay, this book is probably certainly in the fiction side of things, the literary event of the season. KAZUO ISHIGURO has written several novels. There are debates about which everyone has a different favorite. His two best known, I would say, are The Remains of the Day and Never Let Me Go, both of which were made into highly acclaimed films, and each of which has sold several million copies. His last novel, which came out over 5 years ago, was The Berry Giant, which was charming and lovely. And then in 2017, he won the Nobel Prize for Literature, which was something of a surprise, but a very happy surprise. And this is his first book since then. So any Ishiguro novel is an event, because he only writes one roughly every 5 years. But the fact that it's the first one since he won the Nobel Prize makes it extra. It has gotten tremendous early reviews. You can't see, if you can see me, you can see that I'm holding up yesterday's New York Times Magazine. That's him on the cover of the magazine, because he had a new book out, in case you need proof that this is a big deal book. The book is about an artificial friend named Clara, who, when we meet her, this book is from her perspective, she is sitting in a store waiting to be purchased. And in the meantime, she's passing the time by watching the humans as they walk by the store or come into the store and learning from them. She is built to observe and to understand humans. And right away, you can see that one of the themes of this book is whether or not machines can feel, which is a big topic these days outside of the fiction world. She is purchased to be the companion to a teenage girl named Josie, who we learn quickly is not well. And the book is about what happens. I can't wait to read it. I've had it on. It's been, none of these books that we're talking about are out yet, although this one will be out tomorrow. I think you already know that the minute the library purchases a book, which means places it on order, it goes into our catalog and you can put a hold on it. You don't have to wait for the books to come out to put holds on things. I've had this one on hold for months. Hopefully I'm the first. In any event, so I think it's gotten rapturous reviews. It's being called just dazzling. And I also think it's got some very dark elements, and it's probably going to be an emotional roller coaster to read. But that was an easy first book in the 20. You'll see these are going to go in chronological order.
And just one
Yes,
other
Tom.
point. One other point, of course, you pointed out the magazine. It's of course also in yesterday's New York Times book review.
Yes.
Yes, and they
Yes. Right. I mean,
all kinds of details.
It's everywhere. It's coming out in ISHIGURO lives in London, and it's just come out there as well. It's sort of coming out all over the place at the same time. Yeah, I feel pretty strongly that this is going to be a big book. So
I'm gonna use up all my questions at one time.
no such thing.
So could this be a contender for a Thursday night book club discussion?
I have to read it first.
Okay, but it could be a contender. Okay.
I mean, I'd have to read it. I don't think the book club has ever read an ISHIGURO. We're trying not to repeat authors if we can avoid it. So, but from the plot, I think so. Certainly from the plot. Remember, Thursday night book club books, we have to be able to get enough copies on, and this one's going to be on too many hold lists for too long, so it won't be a quick contender. Okay, that's the first book, Clara and the Sun. Hold on. There we go. Here's the second book.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I knew Rose. Rose, I knew you were going to like this one. So Walter Isaacson is, there's two biographies in the 20 that are written by masters of the genre, and this is the first one. Walter Isaacson has written what I think is the definitive Leonardo da Vinci biography. He's written the definitive Steve Jobs biography. He's also written biographies of Kissinger and Ben Franklin and Einstein. He is so good at telling a story and telling the story of a life. He's a history professor at Tulane, but he's also been the chair of CNN and the editor of Time magazine. So he's something of a Renaissance figure to me. And this book, which I wasn't sure first whether to put this in biography or in other nonfiction, but I put it in biography. It's really the biography of Jennifer Doudna, who read when she was in 6th grade a book called The Double Helix about the Watson and Crick discovery, and she was obsessed with it, and right then decided that that she wanted to become a scientist and she wanted to study DNA. And what she and her collaborators did was develop something that's known as CRISPR, CRISPR, and I decided I had to know what that stood for, and it stands for Clusters of Regularly Interspaced Short Palindromic repeats. Okay, let's call it CRISPR because none of that makes any sense to me. But what CRISPR does is it allows for the easy and precise alteration of DNA sequences to modify gene function. Now, I'm not a scientist, but I know what that means. And I think most of us know what that means. It's an extraordinary technological development that James Watson of Watson and Crick told Jennifer Doudna was the most significant development since they discovered the structure of DNA. And if you step back and think for a moment about what that means, it means we can do things to make us less susceptible to viruses, a topical idea. We maybe could do things to make us less susceptible to mental illness. But what else could we do, and what else would it mean? Could we enhance or change genes to modify our children's IQs? And you start to very quickly go down a slippery slope of ethical dilemmas, because I think we all know enough about human nature to know that once this technology is out there, people are going to want to do things with it that it wasn't invented to do. Doudna has not only come up with CRISPR, but she's also wrestling with these. She's a leader in wrestling with all the moral issues that come with it. And she and her collaborators won the Nobel Prize in 2020 for this. And what Isaacson has done this quote unquote, according to the reviews, gripping account of scientific advancement and the scientists who made it happen. So you could see why I wasn't sure where to put it, but it seems to be mostly a biography, and so I put it in biography. This is out next Tuesday, March 9th, and I can't wait to read it.
And just like you say, Cindy, Isaacson is extremely readable.
Totally readable.
Yeah.
Super readable.
I mean, he takes technical stuff and he makes it okay for the regular man,
I know.
regular woman.
So
I first heard about CRISPR
yeah,
podcast that Alan Alda does. It's called Clear and Vivid.
yep.
Of course, you know, he's fascinated with science. I think he doesn't want to call them interviews. He's had a conversation with her. So if you want to hunt down a podcast, it's Alan Alda and it's called Clear and Vivid, and she might have been on that.
Yeah, she's pretty great. She's pretty great, obviously. Okay, shall we move on?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So World War II historic fiction is the gift that keeps on giving. Every publishing season, there are more books set during World War II everywhere in World War II, our country, Europe, Asia, that tell some story that's very World War II specific, and all of them sell very well and are very, very popular. I always have to figure out for the other fiction handout which ones to include, because there are too many to include all of them. And there are a few authors who are sort of becoming particularly strong in this genre, and Kate Quinn is one of them. The Rose Code is her new book. She's written 2 earlier World War II historical novels, The Alice Network and The Huntress. And she keeps getting better, in my opinion, as she's going along. This one is showing up on a lot of lists, and I think it's because it's set in the first case around Bletchley Park, which many of you may know is where Alan Turing and people like him were housed during World War II and tasked with breaking the German military code, which they did an exceptionally good job at. So the book, which provides a lot of code breaking information and techniques and a lot of historical detail, is in the first instance set in during World War II in Bletchley Park, and is about 3 women, very disparate women, who are all recruited to Bletchley and are very, very good at their job and become close friends. One of the 3 susses out that amongst their group at Bletchley, someone is a traitor and is spying back. And in her efforts to try to figure out who that is, others decide that she must be the traitor, and she gets committed to a mental asylum. The book then goes forward a couple of years to 1947, as the country is coming out of the war and preparing for the wedding of Princess Elizabeth to Prince Philip. So she's nicely bringing in I think she's banking on the popularity of the Netflix series, The Crown, which won 4 Golden Globes yesterday, in case you missed it, to bring in some extra readers for this. And the other 2 women realized that the 3rd woman, the one who's been put in a mental asylum, was right, and that there is a traitor, or there was a traitor, and they get her out of the mental asylum and work together. The 3 of them work together to figure out who the traitor is. So this is World War II. This is decoding. This is a little bit of a thriller mystery, and a little bit of the royal family and a royal wedding, all in one nifty package. And I'm pretty sure this is going to be pretty popular and do very, very well. So I picked it. It's coming out also on March 9th. Kate Quinn, The Rose Code.
Like that.
Yeah, right. I mean, I don't read, to be honest, I don't read that much of these because they start to blend together, but this one I want to read.
Cindy, I think that's the wine when you say blend together.
Say that again.
I think it's the wine that you're using.
The wine is what's causing them to blend together. That must be it,
Yes.
Pat.
I
Thank you
think
for
that's
that
it.
comment. That was very helpful comment.
Very good.
Any other thoughts before we move on? Okay. This is book 4. I just want to make an observation, and this is part of why I think the schedule is still, the pandemic is still messing with the schedule. Usually the books
Awesome.
in the handouts and the 20 that I talk about are chronologically geared towards the first part of the publishing season that we're talking about, because just more is known about that. That isn't the case this time. This is book 4, and we're already in April. And April turns out to be the big month of the year, or the big month of this 6-month window, instead of March. And I think that that's because they're still backlogged and they're still clearing out. So Broken in the Best Possible Way by Jenny Lawson is coming out on April 6th. One of the issues that is starting to come out of the pandemic, and I think we're going to be grappling with for a long time, is mental illness and depression, and how those problems and health issues have been exacerbated by the pandemic, especially for people who live alone. Jenny Lawson has written 2 previous books about her personal struggles with depression and some physical health issues as well. She has developed a cult-like following for those books. They're called Let's Pretend This Never Happened and Furiously Happy. I read Let's Pretend This Never Happened and was snorting with laughter while I was reading it, which I almost never do. She has a gift for talking about very difficult, very dark topics with exceptional humor. And in that way, she makes it not such a taboo to talk about, if you see what I mean. She lives in Texas with her husband and daughter, and has become a friend of my heart by opening up a bookstore that serves booze. And you don't find that very often, even in Texas, you don't find that very often. So this is her third book. And it's just more, I'm not, it's more of the same, but she shares her own family history with dementia. And she really is not, she's not pills that are usually what people try to take to try to help with mental illness, just don't work on her at all. And she undergoes what's called a transcranial magnetic stimulation treatment to try to help. She talks about that in some detail and about the insurance struggles that came along with it. She also talks about she struggles with arthritis, and she talks about that. And she's not an old woman, so she shares all of this, but in ways that are not only funny but ultimately hopeful. And I wasn't sure whether to include this book, even though I'm a huge fan of hers. And then I saw that its initial print run is 250,000 copies, which is massive, massive for a book like this. And so that told me that the publishers think this is going to be a big deal. And I think right now it's exactly the kind of book that people who are struggling as we hobble along to the end of this phase of the pandemic. It's the kind of book that people are going to really.
Excuse me a minute. Can you excuse me?
Yes, Pat.
I've got 4 deer in my yard. I'm going to take a picture. But I'll be
Okay,
right
that's
back.
fine. That's fine. Should we wait for you to come back?
No, I can hear you.
Okay. Okay, so that's why I included it. It's Jenny Lawson's Broken in the Best Possible Way, and it'll be out on April 6th. Spring and summer are when we get the vast majority of the
Cindy?
debut fiction.
Cindy, just,
Yes, Joan.
excuse me.
Yeah.
I didn't realize I was muted. I was trying to ask you, what was the book that made you laugh out loud by Jenny
Oh,
Lawson?
it's called Let's Pretend This Never Happened.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Sorry.
by Jenny Lawson. It's her first book. Okay. So there are a lot of debut novels that come out in the spring and the summer. There's fewer of them in the fall because the fall is when the heavy hitter books come out and debuts are a little bit hit and miss. And so I like to try to include a debut, but that's tricky because how do you know? You don't have the writer's backlist to rely on. And I picked, this is the debut novel that I picked to include in the 20 notables. I picked it for, well, I really love the cover. It's shallow, I know, but I really love the cover, and the color of the cover and everything. But I picked it because I'm hearing about it everywhere. It is, Pip Williams is Australian, and we don't get enough Australian fiction in my view. And it's coming out all over the English-speaking world at roughly the same time. It is already out in the UK, and it's gotten terrific reviews. Here's the premise. The book is about a woman named Esme, who, when she was a little girl, spent a lot of time sitting underneath the work table in a garden shed in Oxford, where her father and a team of lexicographers were working to put together the very first Oxford English Dictionary. And one day when she's sitting under the table, a piece of paper comes off that work table and comes down onto the floor, and on it is the word bondmaid, B-O-N-D-M-A-I-D, which means slave girl. And it had come off the table and onto the floor because it had been rejected by the group of lexicographers, all of whom are male, who are working on the OED. And she starts to collect the words that the men who are working around this table are rejecting by casting to the floor. And I just love the image that comes into my mind from that, and the idea that there's this little girl who just wants to hang out where her father's working, and starts to collect these words. And as Esme grows up, she realizes that words relating to women's experience and words relating to the experiences of less well-educated, let's put it that way, people, not like these men, are getting unrecorded and are not part of what's going into this august Oxford English Dictionary. And so she decides to make a collection of words for her own dictionary called the Dictionary of Lost Words. And in order to do that, she goes out from Oxford into the world of the people whose words she wants to be part of this dictionary. And I just think this sounds marvelous. It's set during the height of the women's suffrage movement in the UK and right before World War I. And it's based on some actual archival history. It's not an idea out of the blue, and it is apparently meticulously researched and just a joy. I'm going to also share that I confused this book, which has been on my watch list for a while, with another book called The Liar's Dictionary, written by a woman whose last name is also Williams. So you could see how I would have confused them. The Liar's Dictionary came out in January, and it's about a group of people who were working on a rival dictionary to the OED. And one of the people working on that starts putting made up words in. And
Sounds
a
good.
woman today has been hired to find those made up words before the dictionary goes digital. And I read that book. That book came out in January and I adored it. And so if you're interested in this kind of thing and words and word play, I recommend it. And I recommend, having not read it yet, but I know I can't wait to read it. I recommend this one too. So it's very interesting to me that there are two books that are similar and about this coming out so close together. Okay, moving on. Why does this happen? Why does this happen? There we go. Okay. A short story collection, also coming out on April 6th. Similar to KAZUO ISHIGURO, anytime Haruki Murakami has a book coming out, it's something of an event. He is, for those of you who have not read him, a Japanese author who writes in Japanese, and so his books are translated. And some of you may know I struggle sometimes with translated literature because it never quite reads to me right, because we're not reading the words that the author actually wrote. That thought's going to come up again in a little bit, but this is the only way to read Murakami. He's been working with the same translator for forever, so that's helpful. And he has a massive cult following. Every year that the Nobel Prize comes out in literature and he doesn't win, there's a hue and cry. His work has been translated into more than 50 languages, and he's won virtually every literary prize that can be won. This is a collection of 8 stories that are all, as you might have guessed from the title, in first person singular. Larry, there's your voice. And they're so personal, and they're so intricately tied to what people know are Murakami's own interests, that there's been already a lot of discussion about how much this is fiction and how much it's maybe memoir instead. And the reader is asked to make that decision. It touches on his love of music and his love of baseball, and there's a lot of nostalgia for youth in here. He's also known for threading magical realism elements into all of his writings, and several of the stories rely heavily on that type of literary device. So lots and lots of buzz about this because it's him and because these are meant to be really particularly poignant and personal.
And I have to ask, did you read Kafka on the Shore?
Yes, I did. And why are you asking?
Well, he wrote it.
I know. I've read a lot.
Because I started to read the book and I didn't get that far with it. It was one of these, like, I know there's something going on here, and this is worthwhile, but it,
I read it.
it was
I
a-
mean,
it was a-
I'm hit and miss with him.
okay.
I'm
okay,
hit
that's why I
and
was
miss
wondering.
with him, but I like the sound of these stories a lot, and it's getting some great buzz.
Okay,
And he's, he's all that, so.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. No, there we go. Okay, so many of you know that I am a big Philip Roth fan. I told you that there were 2 masters of biography writing in this. Here's the second one. This book is on more most anticipated book lists than any other book in the 20 notables. Philip Roth, of course, was, I think it is fair to say, a literary titan of the 20th century, but he was also a very divisive one. And he died in 2018. And before he died, he named Blake Bailey as his official authorized biographer, the only one there will ever be. And I don't think you can understate what that means. He gave Bailey access to his entire personal archive, let him freely interview his colleagues, his friends, and his former lovers, of which there are many. And he also sat down before he died for a series of incredibly candid conversations with him. And this book is the result. There's no surprise. This has been in the works for a while. It has been hotly anticipated forever and a day. I kept waiting to see whether this date would slip because it kept not coming out and not coming out, but this book is coming out on April 6th. The early buzz on it is that it is as dynamic and gripping as any of Roth's own fiction. It has some reveals of some of the real life inspirations for some of his most famous characters. He talks about Roth's literary rivalry friendship with the other titans, Saul Bellow and John Updike and William Styron. There's probably going to be, I'm guessing, a lot of emphasis about his 20-year relationship with the actress Claire Bloom, which is the subject of some of his fiction, and she's written her own fairly scandalous and furious memoir called Leaving the Doll's House about her relationship with him. And I think this is going to be a very big book. So this was an easy one for me to include among the 20 notables.
Tom asked in the chat if the Tom Stoppard biography was also in the running for the top 20.
So the Tom Stoppard biography came out in February. And so the answer is no, because this is from March to August. I can't wait. I haven't read the Tom Stoppard biography. I have it on hold. Hermione, this is a biography of the playwright Tom Stoppard, who I revere, by Hermione Lee, who is also in the big leagues of biographers, and I'm really looking forward to reading it, but it came out already, so it's not included.
Thanks.
Very good question. Okay. Empire of Pain, The Secret History of the Sackler Family by Patrick Radden Keefe is coming out on April 13th. Patrick Keefe is a staff writer at The New Yorker, and a few years ago, he wrote a book called Say Nothing, which is, in my very subjective view, the best book about Northern Ireland and the Troubles that exists today. It won the National Book Critics Circle Award and was selected as one of the top 10 books of 2019 by every important newspaper who does that sort of thing. It was really, really, really that good. And if you are interested in that topic and you haven't read it, I cannot recommend it highly enough, although it does not make for easy reading. And this is his new book.
Could you repeat that title, please?
Say Nothing.
Oh, okay.
Is the first book.
Okay.
And it's actually, you can see it if your screen is big enough, it's referenced on the cover of his new book, Empire of Pain. For his new book, he's picked an unbelievably
Oh, I see.
cutting edge current topic. The Sackler family is mostly known so far, but that's about to change, for their incredible philanthropy. They were super wealthy and gave tons and tons of money to museums and science programs around the world. And no one actually really knew where that money came, where the source of all of that family fortune was. And it turns out that several decades ago, 3 doctor brothers worked together and developed a pill called Valium. And one of the brothers who had particular insight into marketing, especially for pharmaceuticals, bought an ad firm and then bought a drug manufacturer. And they used all of this to build an empire centered around Valium. And they made their first fortune that way. 40 years later, they took all of what worked so well with marketing Valium, including, and I think this is common knowledge, downplaying the addictiveness of the drug and working some influence with the FDA and with doctors to launch something even more potent than Valium called OxyContin.
Oh my gosh.
And the drug, of course, made something like $35 billion for them before becoming the source of a major national public health crisis. And so that's what this book is about. And I think, given how topical that is, and given how good Say Nothing was, this is going to be a big deal. And it comes out on April 13th. Questions? No, just a lot of, I get it. Okay, good. Okay, yes.
Question.
Yes,
Were
Rose.
these, is this an American family?
Yes. 3 doctors, Raymond Mortimer and Arthur Sackler are the names of the 3 brothers. Arthur was the sort of major, he worked at a mental institution, and that's where he came up with the idea for Valium. And it's his nephew, Raymond's son, Richard, who runs the family-owned drug company that manufactures OxyContin. So it's a dynasty.
Right.
Okay. Book 9, I think I'm counting right. This is another one that was an easy pick, and has been rumored to be in the works for 2 years. It is a posthumous collection of travel writing by Anthony Bourdain. Of course, the author of several novels and cooking memoirs and travel books, and the host of No Reservations and Parts Unknown, the 2 super popular travel and food television shows. He died in June of 2018, and early in 2019, word came out that there was going to be a posthumous book, and I've been waiting for it ever since. And it is coming out on April 20th, and it's called World Travel: An Irreverent Guide. Anthony Bourdain was known for his travel. He lived in New York. He went to Argentina, to France, to Shanghai, to Tanzania, to Cambodia, to Vietnam, to Italy, to Borneo. He went everywhere, and he met with people, and he ate, and he didn't eat fancy, and he ate everything and anything, and expressed his opinions without tact, shall we say. And he had a massive cult-like following, and I know that this book is going to be a big deal, and it's going to be a bigger deal because no one has been able to travel for a year and then some. And this is actually really a travel guide more than it is a food book. It's going to introduce his personal favorite places, on advice on how to get there, where to stay, what to eat, and where not to go in all of those places. This was co-written by his friend Lori Woolever, who used her own conversations with him. So this is really his own words, some of which he wrote and some of which she took and wrote down from their own conversations. And there's some supplemental essays, including one by his brother about what it was like to travel with him. And this is going to be, this is going to get scooped up. Everyone's going to want to read this. So this was an easy one to put in.
Cindy,
So yeah.
what was that, Netflix? You recommended to me The Repair Shop and
Yes. Now I know what you're thinking of. So there's a Netflix show called Somebody Feed Phil.
that's,
That is a kinder, gentler version of this.
yeah.
Version of what Anthony Bourdain did. Phil is the opposite of Anthony Bourdain. They have in common that they're both are stupid thin for how much they eat, and that they would eat anything and love to eat. But where Anthony Bourdain was sort of surly and negative, Phil Rosenthal, who is the host of Somebody Feed Phil, is just happy and loves meeting people and loves being in the world. So they're opposite sides of the same coin. But if you have Netflix and you haven't watched Somebody Feed Phil, you just be happy and you will just be pining to travel again from it. Thanks for bringing that up, Mary. Okay, Paula, pay attention to book 10. I got an email from Paula over the weekend saying, oh, I've started looking at the handouts. I can't wait for Book Buzz. And I was so excited to see you had Reunion Beach in the handouts. I've been really looking forward to it. And I did not ruin the surprise by writing her back and telling her that Reunion Beach was one of the 20 notables. We get every single summer, we get the beach books. That they're set in Nantucket, they're set on Martha's Vineyard, they're set on the Outer Banks or in the low country of South Carolina. There are beach books. Sometimes they're set around one of the Great Lakes, but there are always a slew of novels about stuff that happens by the water in the summer. And they're very, very popular. And one of the masters of the genre is a writer named Dorothea Benton Frank, who always wrote about the low country of South Carolina, and she died in 2019. And when she died, she was working on a new book called Reunion Beach, which I don't think we're ever going to get, and that's not what this is. What this is a collection of stories and novels and essays by her peers in homage to her. And normally I don't usually put one of these types of books in the 20 notables, but because it's an homage to Dorothea Benton Frank, who was always on the bestseller list, and because the writers who write, including the queen, the reigning queen, Ellen Hildebrand, and Adriana Trigiani, and Mary Alice Monroe, and Patty Callahan, and others, are really, these were really the players in the genre, have all worked together to come up with this collection. This is going to be a massive book of the summer. It's coming out at the end of April, on April 27th, but it's going to be it's going to be the beach book of the summer. Just to give you a flavor, Hildebrand has written a sequel to one of her most recent novels, The Summer of '69. Trigiani has written an interview with Dorothea Benton Frank and Pat Conroy together up in heaven. Patty Callahan has a summer story about a trip to a beach in South Carolina. They're all going to be like that. So you're going to get each of these writers who is really at the top of the game, writing writing a Dorothea Benton Frank style book or story, I should say. And there's just no question in my mind that this is going to be a perfect summer read and a big book. So that's book 10. Okay, so we're halfway through. Everyone good?
Yep.
Okay, just checking because I can't see you all. Okay. Book 11, remember what I said about translated literature, is called Whereabouts, and it's by Jhumpa Lahiri, and it's also coming out on April 27th. So Jhumpa Lahiri has written 3 novels, a short story collection, Interpreter of Maladies, which won the Pulitzer Prize, and a work of nonfiction called In Other Words. And she's a magnificent writer. She's from India. She's lived in the United States for a very long time, so she's fluent in those 2 languages, and she now lives in Italy, has taught herself Italian, is fluent in Italian, and wrote Whereabouts initially in Italian, and did her own translation of it into English. And it has generated a tremendous amount of buzz. She hasn't written a novel since The Lowland, which came out in 2013. So that's a really long time. And people are very, very excited about this book. It is a year in the life of a single middle-aged woman who lives in an unnamed Italian city. She's a writer and a teacher. And she has a difficult relationship with her mother. And has second-guessed her life path. The book is comprised of 46 short chapters, each of which is her speaking to her therapist in response to her therapist's request that she say something positive in every one of their sessions. And each one is identified by the where in the whereabouts she's coming up with this positive thought. So On the Sidewalk is the name of one chapter, or By the Sea is the name of another. It is I'm from what I can tell, and again, I'm a little handicapped because I haven't been able to read it, but it is meant to be magnificent. Spare prose, haunting prose, and something in the nature of a transformation that takes place in this woman's life over the course of this year. So that's getting a lot of attention and a lot of buzz, and it's coming out on April 27th. Okay.
Can I ask a
Yeah,
question?
of course you can.
Is the woman in the book Italian, or is she?
I assume the answer to that is yes, but I don't know that we even know that. She
Okay.
lives in Italy. We know she lives in Italy, and we know her mother lives in Italy. So let's say yes. But the city isn't named. I'm not sure she's named. And so it may just be something we have to infer.
Okay.
Okay. Next book. I've talked, if you've attended Book Buzz in the past, you will have heard me mention the name Michael Lewis. He is who you want to read on whatever the big topic of the day is. He wrote the definitive book about the securitization meltdown in 2008 called The Big Short, which if you didn't read, you saw the movie probably. And there is no other book that I've ever encountered that explains the securitization meltdown as well and as easy to understand as it. He also wrote a book called The Blind Side, which was made into a movie you've probably seen,
Yeah.
about a high school football player.
Mhm.
And he wrote a book called Liar's Poker, which exposed the world of investment banking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. His other most famous book is Moneyball, which is about the Oakland A's and what makes baseball work. He's really, really good at getting to the heart of what's going on and explaining it to the rest of us. And The Premonition, which is coming out on May 4th, is about the pandemic. And it is specifically about a group of doctors nicknamed the Wolverines, who were completely ready to fight the pandemic. They had top state-of-the-art labs. They had experience with pandemic scares of the bird flu and the swine flu. They had brilliant backgrounds, and they had no official permission from the administration of the former president to implement their work. And I don't want to make this, we are in a different world in 2021. Things are moving forward in a very positive way when it comes to COVID-19 and the pandemic. But fundamentally, this is about a group of medical visionaries who were fighting the wall of denial and ignorance that was the official stance of the administration last year. He said in one of the interviews he's given about this book that it's a superhero story where the superheroes seem to lose the war, but all they've lost is a battle, and there's a war they're going to win. And I know that a lot of us want to understand better what happened with the pandemic, and this is going to be the book about it. He has such a proven track record that I have no doubt. So that's the Premonition, and it's coming out on May 4th. And there are no reviews about this book. Things are being kept very tight about this book, which is all the more reason why I think it's going to be right on point. Okay. So several years ago, a perfect nonfiction book came out called The Boys in the Boat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for saying
Excellent.
yeah. When people have come and say that they don't read enough nonfiction and they really want to read nonfiction, one of the first questions I ask them is if they've read The Boys in the Boat. So if you haven't read it, you need to. And for those of you who haven't read it, or if you read it a long time ago and you don't quite remember, it's about a group of young men from very different backgrounds who rowed crew for their college and wound up being sent to the 1936 Olympics and winning gold.
There's a movie too.
And it was a PBS documentary, The Boys
Yes.
of 36.
Yeah.
It's brilliant, and it's brilliant for several reasons. One of which is that we get a real sense of each of these young men, their backgrounds, their motivations, what brought them to crew and what brought them to that school. And then we get them as a unit working together and pulling off this extremely unlikely athletic event. And that book was written by a guy named Daniel James Brown, and he's now written another book, and it's called Facing the Mountain. So even if I didn't think that what this book was about was really important and was going to get a lot of attention, I'd say that his next book after Boys in the Boat was going to get a lot of attention. But what he's chosen to write about is 4 Japanese American families during World War II and their sons who left the internment camps to fight in the war. And so you can already start to, so everyone knows that after Pearl Harbor, Japanese American families were interned in the United States, not as it turns out, which is relevant to the story, in Hawaii, but on the mainland. In 1943, if you were in that internment camp and you were draft age and you were born in America, so your parents were immigrants, but you were born here, you were eligible to volunteer to be part of a segregated Japanese American unit, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. And you were first sent, if you chose to volunteer, to Mississippi for training. And then you were sent, as it turns out, to fairly dangerous places in Europe to attempt particularly difficult tasks. And so what Brown does is he tells the story not just of a few of these men, many of whom came from the internment camps, but some came from Hawaii. And so there was tension already because between those who had been interned and those who hadn't, but also of their families that were left behind in the internment camps, and also of the people who chose not to do this because they weren't prepared to take an oath of loyalty to the country while they were interned, and they felt they had been, that their civil rights had been taken away. So it takes on a part of our history that I think does not yet, notwithstanding all of the scholarship on World War II, have enough attention. And it does it in a way where we're going to get the same kind of disparate backstories of individual people then coming together as a unit to go off to fight and accomplish extraordinary things. And so I think it's going to be as impactful and as great a read as Boys in the Boat. It just popped out at me from among the history and politics handouts. So I wanted to share it with you. Yes, okay, so that's coming out on May 11th.
Like that one.
Yeah. This was a surprise. Word came out about this book literally in the last week or two. And I had one of my scramblings to make room for it in the biography and memoir handout, and I knew immediately it would be one of the 20 notables. It's Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's Notes on Grief. If you don't know who she is, you need to know about her. She's the author of 3 novels, each one of which has won more prizes than the one before. Americana is probably the best known of the 3, but Half of a Yellow Sun, which won the Women's Prize for Fiction, was also named last year the winner of winners in honor of the 25th anniversary of the Women's Prize for Fiction. And her first novel, Purple Hibiscus, which is probably the least well-known, won 2 big literary awards. She's also written a story collection called The Thing Around Your Neck, and a very, very powerful essay called We Should All Be Feminists that got a lot of attention in 2016 and 2017. She is just the bomb. She's the bomb. And last summer, her father in Nigeria died unexpectedly to complications of kidney failure in the midst of the pandemic when all family communication was on video. And she wrote a brilliant piece several months ago in the New Yorker about her, how shattered she was by this loss, and about what it meant to know that she was just one of millions of people grieving at this particular time, and about her loneliness and her anger in the midst of all of that grief. She also talked about her father's extraordinary life. The essay reverberated so deeply that she was commissioned to turn it into a book. And this is the book. I read the essay. It's not a short essay, so I don't think this will be a big book, meaning I don't think it'll be long. The essay was for the New Yorker. It was one of their longer pieces. It's easy to see this being turned into a book, so I think she's just going to take that essay and expand on it in certain places. But it is unbelievably well timed. Her writing is so magnificent that she just gets to the heart of something that all of us have been touched by lately. And the minute this was announced, it was everywhere. So that's coming out on May 11th. And I think it's going to be a big deal. So when I saw that there was a book coming out by Stacey Abrams called While Justice Sleeps.
Oh,
I put it in the history and politics section of my master long list of potential book buzz titles. And when I started to call that list to start to figure out what books were going where and how many books I had and all the rest of that stuff that I start to do usually a couple of months ahead of time, I was astonished to discover that a book called While Justice Sleeps by Stacey Abrams did not belong in history and politics because it's a novel. And that it turns out that Stacey Abrams, the political genius we all know, who is more than anyone, I think, single-handedly responsible for what happened in Georgia in the Senate runoff events, and has really devoted herself to voting rights, is the author under a pseudonym of Selena Montgomery of several very popular romance novels. I had no idea about this. She's decided to veer away from the pen name and away from romance and write a thriller, a legal thriller. I also didn't know, although I should have, that she's a tax lawyer by training, and that she was in the Georgia House of Representatives for 11 years before she ran for governor of Georgia in 2018. So, you know, her name is so significant these days that it could have been a history and politics book, and I would probably have put it in the notable 20. But that it's a legal thriller and it's by Stacey Abrams, this was an easy one to include. The plot involves a woman who is a law clerk to one of the most prominent of the 9 Supreme Court justices, who happens to be, in the current constitution of the Supreme Court, the sway vote, the one that sometimes goes left and sometimes goes right. That justice slips into a coma unexpectedly, and she discovers that she has been named his legal guardian and his power of attorney. And she then discovers that he was secretly doing research behind the scenes of one of the court's current most controversial cases, which involves the proposed merger of a biotech company and a genetics firm. Think about the Walter Isaacson novel for a minute, a biography for a minute, and that the justice expected that there was a significant conspiracy going on in the government relating to this merger. And that you have the plot of the book. So while he's in a coma, she's trying to figure it out. So, you know, people who like that sort of thing will want to read it. People who like Stacey Abrams will want to read it. People are going to want to read this book. And it's coming out on May 11th. And who else knew? Did anyone else know that she wrote romance novels? Rose
I
knew.
did. Yeah,
How did you know that, Rose?
I had read about her on the internet, and they mentioned it.
Trust the internet to tell you
Yeah.
these things.
I knew it too,
Who said that?
Andrea.
Andrea you knew
Yeah.
for the same way. I
I
should have
knew.
known. I just missed it.
Yeah, I don't know where I heard it, but I hadn't heard about it. I was amazed when I did
Yes,
hear it.
thank you. Okay, I feel better.
Yeah.
I feel better.
Yeah.
Really, she's amazing, all the things she's done besides, you know, justice for voting.
I know it's amazing.
She is
She's
something else.
formed several companies that, you know, have helped several nonprofits.
No, you're absolutely
I mean,
right.
it's amazing.
She's focused also on the training and hiring of young people of color, and tackling a bunch of social issues.
Yeah.
But voting rights is her big thing at the moment. Okay, so anyway, that's coming out on May 11th. The next book is called The Anthropocene Reviewed, and it's by John Green, and it's coming out on May 18th. If you're not a YA fan, you may not know, or if you don't have children who've come of age in the aughts, you may not know who John Green is, but he is, I think it's safe to say, I'd have to double check with Jen Nash, but I think it's safe to say that he is the #1 writer in the YA field today. his first novel, Looking for Alaska, was on the PBS Great American Reads list of 100 most loved novels. His best known novel is called The Fault in Our Stars, which was made into a complete tearjerker of a movie. People adore him. He sold millions and millions and millions of copies of his books. This is not a novel, and it's not YA. He has a podcast, and the name of the podcast is The Anthropocene Reviewed. So what is the Anthropocene? What does that word mean? The Anthropocene epoch is the geological era that we are now viewed among scientists as being in. And it dates from the start of the time of significant human impact on the Earth's geology and ecosystems. The premise of the podcast is, if we're living in an age in which human activity has shaped the planet and its biodiversity, he is choosing to explore all the different facets of our human-centered planet. And he rates them on a 1 to 5 scale. And I'm not talking about only heavy-duty scientific things. He rates the Taco Bell breakfast menu. Just to give you an example of the range of stuff that comes up in this podcast, he rates the QWERTY keyboard. It's tongue-in-cheek, but it's not. He said in an interview that the podcast, which has now been turned into a collection of essays that are in this book, is an attempt to chart the contradictions of human life as I experience it. How we can be so compassionate and so cruel, so persistent and so quick to despair. So judging just by his popularity as a writer, by the popularity of the podcast, and by how topical this is, I think this is going to be a very successful book. And I included it as a representative from the essay collection handout.
Good one.
The podcast has the same name.
Same title. Podcast has the same title. Easy to find, very popular. Okay. So the nonfiction handouts are filled with books that parse the Black Lives Matter movement in the wake of the protests last summer. That was true last fall, but those books were very, very knee-jerk. And the new books that are coming out are much more thoughtful. There are a lot of them. A lot of them try to take on this idea of acknowledging the persistence of racism in our country and what people can do about that, people who aren't subject to that racism, what they can do about it. And I wanted to pick up one of them to highlight in the 20 notables because it's one of the big themes of all of the books in the handouts. And this book is the one that is coming up the most. Other than the Philip Roth biography, it's the one that's on the most anticipated lists for the year. It's called How the Word is Passed, A Reckoning with the History of Slavery Across America, and it's by Clint Smith, and it's coming out on June 1st. So Clint Smith is a staff writer at The Atlantic, and just as an aside, The Atlantic has been killing it lately. Their articles about pandemic-related topics and about these sort of topics, they have been unbelievably good. Really clearly written, really thorough, really engaging, and really going to the heart of the matter. So if there's writings everywhere, there's so much, but if you're looking for one magazine that's really getting it, I would recommend The Atlantic. So he writes for them, and he's also an award-winning poet. His collection, Counting Dissent, Not Dissent DISSENT, descent as in going down. Won a bunch of awards when it came out in 2017. And this book is about visiting the monuments and the landmarks in our country that relate to our country's connection with slavery. And part of what he's focused on is the ways in which those monuments and landmarks actually are not historically accurate. Some are and some aren't. So for example, one of the places he focuses on is Jefferson's Monticello plantation, and you know the accuracies and inaccuracies in Jefferson's life on this particular topic. Another one he focuses on is the Whitney plantation, which is one of the few remaining plantations that is actually devoted to depicting the way the slaves on it lived and how they worked. He goes to the Blandford Cemetery, which is a cemetery for tens of thousands of Confederate soldiers who are honored every year by people who come with Confederate flags and other Confederate paraphernalia to pay homage to their sacrifice. He also, the only place in the United States, outside of the United States he goes to is the House of Slaves in Senegal, which is meant to be a memorial to the exit point for the slaves as they left Africa to come here. And his trigger for writing this book was the removal of 4 Confederate monuments in New Orleans, which happened shortly after the Black Lives Matter protests last summer. He's from New Orleans originally, and that got him thinking about how we tell our stories in this country about slavery. And so the book is a way of coming at that question through these still very much alive and vibrant monuments and landmarks. And I thought that was, I think, and others that have picked up on this book are really, really interested in that way of telling the story. And his writing is so good that this is, I think, going to be a very powerful book. And as I said, it's on a ton of most anticipated lists. So if you want more on this topic, this is the one to look for. Okay, just a few more. I'm sorry for this cover because I don't think anyone really wants a close-up of Mark Zuckerberg's face. But this is going to be a big explosive book. It's called An Ugly Truth, and it's coming out on July 13th. And it's by Shira Frankel and Cecilia Kang, both of whom are investigative reporters for the New York Times. Frankel does cybersecurity, and King does technology and regulatory policy. This book is a deep dive into not just all of the allegations that have been swirling around Facebook in the last few years, but into the sort of the very heart of what Facebook has been doing and has been trying to do more and more of ever since it was set up. The premise is that the missteps, if you want to use a nice word, that Facebook has undergone in the last 4 years, starting with the privacy breaches and the Russian meddling in the 2016 election, are actually not anomalies, but are inevitable based on the way Facebook was built to perform and all of the algorithms and tools that they put in place to encourage people to spend as much time on Facebook as possible, to keep coming back to Facebook. And that in that sense, it became an inevitable conduit for hate speech and political propaganda, and I don't want to use and disinformation. I'm not going to say fake news because That's not my term. All in the name of just constantly wanting to grow. So this is expected to be a fairly explosive expose of Facebook at a time that I think people are really questioning what the role of social media is in our lives, and how to trust the news that we are getting and its sources. So this is on a lot of watch lists, and they're keeping, there's been no reviews leaked about this book. They're keeping this one very, very tight, just like the Premonition, because I think it's going to be a big deal. Okay. Now I have a confession. This is the second to last book, The Madness of Crowds by Louise Penny. I picked the 20 notables on Thursday. Leah was there. I showed her the list. Jane was there too. And yesterday I swapped one out, and I never ever do that. And I'm not going to tell you the book I took out, but this is the book I put in. Louise Penny is the incredibly successful author of a series of detective mysteries featuring Inspector Armand Gamache, who is the head of police in Quebec, in Montreal, and who vacations and has a house in an idyllic Quebec village called Three Pines, which is the kind of place where we'd all love to live. And you would think when you first encounter it in the first book in the series that it's sort of like a Agatha Christie, Miss Marple English village, except that really it isn't, and very, very dark things go on in Three Pines. I am a huge fan of mystery series. I think Wallingford Library patrons in general are. We have a ton of them in the library, and they go out. We can't keep them in, and people discover them and discover them and discover them over and over again. And the Gamache series by Louise Penny is one of them. This is a surefire New York Times bestseller every time she comes out with a new book, which is roughly once a year. And so normally I actually wouldn't have picked this for one of the 20 notables, because it would be every year that I'd be picking a Gamache book as one of the 20 notables. But I changed my mind and put this in yesterday for two reasons. One is that the last several books in the series, which have been very good, have been outside of Three Pines. And the fans of the series really, really love Three Pines. And this one is back in Three Pines. That's the first reason. The second reason is that the plot centers around an incredibly hot topic, which is incendiary views and censorship. When it opens, the inspector is on vacation in Three Pines when he is asked to provide security for what seems like a ho-hum nothing, which is that a visiting professor of statistics is going to give a lecture at a local university. But it turns out that that professor has an agenda which the inspector finds repulsive. He begs the university to cancel her lecture. They refuse, and they accuse him of intellectual cowardice and censorship, and they cite academic freedom. And there starts to be significant debates going on with her views against her views. And then, of course, there's a murder, as there would be. So I was struck by how current a topic she had chosen to take on in this book. And so that's the second reason I included it. And the third reason I included it is that last week, news broke that she was co-authoring a thriller with Hillary Clinton, which is coming out in October. And if you're not bored and you want to come back to Book Buzz in the fall, you may or may not see that book as one of the 20 notables. For those of you who remember, Hillary Clinton's husband, Bill, did a similar collaboration with James Patterson and wrote a book which was a notable 20 when it came out. And that book has a sequel, incredibly, that is coming out during this cycle. And I did not make it one of the notable 20, but it is in the popular fiction handout if you're curious about that. So Louise Penny's name has just sort of vaulted up, if you will. And so that was the third reason I decided this book deserved to be one of the 20 notables. And so I subbed it in. Okay, August 24th for that one. Last book. So usually before I press, the last book of the 20 notables, which by definition is the one coming out the furthest into the 6-month publication window, is sometimes, not sometimes, most of the time, a bit of a flyer for me, because it's usually the one about which the least is known. I worry that the publication date is going to slip because it's so far in the future. I don't know. I just like to cover the full 6-month window, and I do my best to pick something. That's not the case with this book. This one was as easy a pick as the first one, because Paula Hawkins wrote a little book called The Girl on the Train, which rivals Gone Girl as being the definitive start and top of the heap of these kinds of thriller, unreliable narrator, plot twists galore, who knows what, you didn't see that coming kind of books, which are now ubiquitous in the publishing industry, and the mystery and thriller handout is filled with them. And so any book that Paula Hawkins writes is a thing. And the fact that this one is coming out on the very last day of August, on the Tuesday before Labor Day weekend, which is the sleepiest week of the year, with the possible exception of Christmas week, would be surprising, except that it doesn't matter when it's coming out, because it will immediately be #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. And they probably were thinking that people were going to want to take it away for Labor Day weekend. I can tell you what it's about, but it probably doesn't even matter so much what it's about. But basically what it's about is that a young man is found murdered on a houseboat in London. There were 3 women who knew him and who all have issues. So we don't have one unreliable narrator, we have 3. One is his aunt, one is his nosy neighbor, and one is his one-night stand last seen in his house. And so, you know, who are they? What are their issues? They have resentment. They are thinking about revenge. Why are they thinking about revenge? We don't know. Are we going to find out? Yes. Are we going to find out on the last page or the second to last page? Yes, which makes it the quintessential can't stop reading page turner, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Really, what else do you need to know? Paula Hawkins has a new book coming out. It's coming out on August 31st, and it is a guaranteed mega million bestseller, #1.
Cindy,
Yes.
it's just so ironic that I had turned to you for that title. I knew all this
Yes.
stuff about
Yes.
the book.
And I said to you, I don't read them.
You don't read this kind of book, and it's called The Wife Between Us. Can't remember the author's name. And again, you call it an unreliable author.
Yep. Unreliable narrator.
You know,
That's it.
the wife scorned, the old cliche of the younger woman and all of that. And it's in 2 parts. And in that second part, there is one hell of a plot twist you didn't see
There you go.
coming. I would recommend it.
What
There
was
you
it
go.
called?
The Wife Between Us, WIFE.
Yeah.
Wife. Mhm.
Yeah, I read that also, Mary.
I did too.
Yeah, yeah.
So there you go. Those are the notable 20. for spring,
my
summer
God.
2021. And now I can see everybody again. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hi.
Great to see you again. Hi.